From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Susan Vita, the Chief of the Music Division, and I'm very pleased to welcome all of you here tonight. I'm glad to see that there's a mixture of people that I've never met before or never seen before, and people that normally come to our concerts, which is the way we really like it. The official start of the 2013-14 season of concerts from the Library of Congress will take place on October 5th with Randy Newman in the Coolidge Auditorium. And you won't be able to pick one of these up because I think I might have the only one, but you can go online and at lsc.gov/concerts or talk to our concert staff about what is going on. Actually, I wouldn't mind passing this around if anybody is interested in looking at it. So as I said, our concert season actually officially opens on the 5th, but I really consider this our opening, and I think it's a pretty special event for those of you like me who have been fans of our host, Graham Nash, for a long, long time. This is quite special, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy the evening. Graham Nash is a legendary artist, and for those of you who don't already know, you can read the basics about him in the program handout, which I'm sure all of you have. In addition to his solo works, he's well known for his affiliations with timeless groups like The Hollies and Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Tonight he will be speaking about his new book, Wild Tales, and will be joined by fellow author and friend Bob Spitz in talking about his fascinating career. At the conclusion of the talk, Mr. Nash will be available to sign copies of Wild Tales, which are available for purchase in the foyer. We're really thrilled to have this opportunity tonight, which is a first because the officially doesn't go on sale until tomorrow, so you can say you got it first. There will be a short question and answer period at the conclusion of the remarks, and so you can ask all those things that you always wanted to ask him. All right, so please join me now in welcoming Graham Nash and Bob Spitz.
Good. Thank you. How are you all doing? Me too.
This is the first time we've ever done this, man. And
I
scared.
know I'm a virgin. I know. Even at my age.
Well, before we start, I just wanted to congratulate you on your book.
Thank you. It's a sad day.
A sad day. Yes, it is a sad day.
No, it is a sad day. We all know why it's a sad day, and life goes on right in front of you all the time, 24/7. All we have to do is just try and find our way to enjoy it and surround ourselves with family and friends and get on with our lives.
Exactly right.
Yeah, thank you.
That said, I would like to congratulate you. It's for those of you who haven't read it yet or who are just nosing into it. It is a real. I was surprised that you pulled no punches. It's a really eye-opening and I would say hard-hitting examination of not just your life but of rock and roll in general.
Yeah. Yes. I had to be as honest as possible, just to set the scene. What happened is that I have a friend, Gillian Manis, and she's a book agent, and she came to visit me. I live in Hawaii, and I have for about 35 years. And she came to dinner one night, and we were just talking and bullshitting, you know, like people do after dinner. And she said, you know, you really, really should consider writing, you know, all these stories down about your life. And, you know, I'll be 72 my next birthday, and I didn't think I was old enough to write an autobiography. I thought you had to wait until you were 90 years old or something. But she said, I think I know the man that might be able to really help you. And she introduced me to Bob Spitz. And because I spent most of my early life, you know, in World War, you know, in Manchester after World War II, Bob had already done phenomenal research about that times because of his great book on the Beatles biography that Bob wrote. So I didn't have to explain who I was, where I came from, what it was like when I was growing up, because he had already been there writing about John, Paul, George, and Ringo, and Pete Best, of course. So when she put me together with Bob, I knew instantly that I could find a friend. And as I say in the back of the book, you know, I'm very grateful for Bob's help, and he put all my words into some kind of sense.
Hardly. But speaking of Manchester, growing up in a really tough working class, I guess we can call it a ghetto, Salford, where you grew up, were there musical influences to be had post-World War II? Not in my immediate family. I never saw my mother sing. I used to whistle with my dad in harmony when he would take me to the movies occasionally. But there was no, I mean, it wasn't like I had a musical family where people played instruments and did all that stuff. My main sense of music came really from a place called Radio Luxembourg. And that was a radio station in Europe, in Luxembourg, that when the weather was right, made it across the English Channel. And even though it kind of kept fading in and static and stuff, I could hear the American top 40. And that's what turned my life around. Was that the first time you heard rock and roll through Radio Love? The first time I heard rock and roll, yeah. I'd heard skiffle before, and skiffle was a very primitive form of music. A man called Lonnie Donegan had come to America and learned from Big Bill Broonzy and from, you know, Howlin' Wolf and all those people, and he took that kind of music, you know, from Leadbelly and stuff, and brought it to England in his fashion. One of the things about skiffle that was so great was that you could afford it. If you had a cheap acoustic guitar and your grandmother had a washboard, which everybody's grandmother had a washboard in those days because that's how you did your washing, sure, right? And if you had a pole with a piece of string tied to a tea chest, you know, you could have a bass and drums and guitar. We could do it. We could make music. And, you know, for 14, 15-year-old kids after World War II, there was nothing to do. You know, half the houses had been destroyed, you know, in the bombing. There was nothing for kids to do, and then music came along. And what a lot of you might not know is I've been a photographer longer than I've been a musician. In my book, Eye to Eye, my first portrait is the one I took of my mother when I was 10. So I've always been an incredibly visual person, and I can still remember my neighborhood and the state that it was in after World War II, because I was born in 1942, so it still had 2 or 3 years to go by that time. And I have such incredibly strong memories of what we called a blackout curtain, where you had to draw these heavy curtains across the window so that the light wouldn't get out there, so the enemy bombers couldn't see where to bomb. You know, it was a very strange existence. But and rationing as well, I take it. Oh yeah, you couldn't get candy or butter or milk or bread unless you had these coupons that were issued by the government. And I think you told me also that you used to take your sister's pram and fill it up with coal, and you got your ration. Absolutely. Yeah. And we, you know, you would go and find bits of coal around the coal yard. You know, we didn't have enough money to go in and order a certain weight of coal. We always, you know, when you're filling something with coal and you move it, it tend to fall out occasionally, and those were the ones that I would pick up, and I'd fill my sister's pram with that so that we could have heat in the house. And yet, 15 years later, this area becomes the hotbed of rock and roll. We have nothing to do, kid. Everything comes out of here. I mean, yeah. One group after the next. Yes, Manchester and Liverpool, between them, had some of the best bands in the world, you know. You know, obviously the Beatles, and obviously, you know, Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas and the Hollies and you know, Herman's Hermits and Mindbenders. It was incredible in the late 50s, early 60s in Manchester. You were supposed to do what your dad did.
That's what you were supposed to do with your life. If it was good enough for him to be down the mine, then it's good enough for you, get on with it, you know. And my mother and father never let me fall for that, what we call the gold watch theory, where you work for a corporation for 50 years and when you're too old, you know, they give you a gold watch and pat you on the head and they get somebody stronger and younger and cheaper. So my mother and father never let me go for that idea. So I didn't have to do what my dad did or my grandfather did. I could do what I wanted. And I knew from the age of 13 that I wanted to be a rock and roll musician.
Aside from the fact that teenage girls love guys who are in bands, what was your first rock and roll epiphany?
Really, truly an amazing one?
Yeah.
I think February of 1958, Bill Haley and his Comets came to Manchester. And in 58, I was what?
You were
16, something like that. And rock and roll was my life. I wouldn't do my homework. I'd be drawing drum sets and Fender guitars and stage setups and actually practicing my autograph. And in a way, no, I'm very serious. I think in a way that's the way that you pull yourself towards your dream, right? I knew who I was going to be. I mean, I had no clue, of course, but I wanted to be in rock and roll. I wanted to be in the stage. I wanted to make records, and therefore, don't you need to practice your autograph, even though you're only, 14 years old? But Bill Haley's concert in Manchester changed my life. First of all, there was an incredible buzz around town because this was the first rock and roll show to ever come to Manchester. And we'd seen things like Blackboard Jungle, and we knew that Rock Around the Clock was a great record, and the Teddy Boys would tear up seats and turn on fire hoses because this movie really sparked something in the youth. But there was never a doubt in my mind about what I would do with my life. And how fantastic that my parents recognized that passion and let me do that.
Yeah.
I have so many friends who were as good as me, better than me, had to go and do what their dad did and had their dreams crushed from an early age. My dreams were never crushed by my parents.
Well, it was unheard of in those days to be a rock and roll star.
Well, there was no such thing.
Right. Right.
There was no such thing as being a rock and roll star. Not really until Elvis came around in the mid-50s was there such a thing as, I mean, people were saying, get a real job. This music stuff's not going to last. And this was 1957, right? It's now what, 2013?
And parents are still saying that. You've had a really long and wonderful marriage, but your life has been blessed by many really long and enduring relationships. The first one, and I'd love to talk a little bit about it, is a boy who wandered into your class when you were 6 years old, right?
I was sitting in school. Mr. Burke was my teacher. And we were having a lesson about something. All of a sudden, the door opens, and a little old lady wrapped in a shawl, she must have been 1,000 years old, came in with this little kid. And Mr. Burke went over and said something to her. And he comes back to the class, and he goes, "Class, this young kid, Harold Clark, is moving from wherever district he was from. I think it was Broughton. And they've moved, and he's coming to the school, and he's joined Odsal Board School, which was the school I went to. Where's he going to sit?" Well, I'm not an idiot. The only spare seat was right next to me. So, that was obvious where he was going to sit. And from that moment, my life has been changed for the better. Alan Clark and I formed the Hollies in 1962, I think, in December, and had a great time rocking and rolling. I think by the time I left, the Hollies had 17 or 18 top 10 records. Yeah. And I was only, I started the band in 62, but I left in 68. And boy, did I leave for a good reason.
Yeah.
Well,
let me just interrupt for a second. One of the things that really fascinated me through the stories that you told me were how you and Alan apprenticed as musicians. I mean, today, somebody makes a song in their bedroom, slaps it on the internet, and they become an overnight sensation. But the two of you really apprenticed. You really worked hard, didn't you?
Yeah, because we loved it. I couldn't get girls with a camera.
Exactly.
That wasn't happening. You know, nobody ever said, "Hey, that's a sexy camera."
But you did talent shows. You
Yeah,
did
we
competitions.
did everything that we could.
Right.
We played in pubs to 10 people. We played we played everywhere that people would pay us. We were getting paid to do that.
Yeah, right.
God forbid any of the promoters today know that we would do it for nothing. I mean, seriously, I love what I do. Look what I get to do with my life. It's been insane. I looked when Bob put all these words into some kind of readable order, and I got to the end of the manuscript. I swear to God, this is what I said. I looked down and I went, "Holy." I said, "I wish I was him." Because I've never really looked back. I've never, because what can you do about what happened yesterday? You can't, there's not much you can do about the past. And so in being forced to look back because of my autobiography, I realized what an incredible, I mean, I'm smiling at it to myself inside right now. It's been insane. And it has no indication of stopping whatsoever. I'm in the middle of a solo tour right now, and the shows are going fantastically well. And I'm stripping down all the songs to just the essence. If I can't play you a song with one guitar on my piano and touch your heart, I'm wasting your time. And that's what I don't want to do. We don't have much time left, any of us. So time to me is incredibly precious, and I don't want to waste any of it. So and good night. Yes.
Let's talk about a few of the incarnations that you and Alan went through. Before the Hollies even came about, there was, let's see if I can get them in order. There was the Two Teens.
The Two Teens, yes.
You were Ricky and Dane Young.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Well,
were you summoning Neil?
Yeah, somebody called Neil. Yeah, Ricky and Neil Young. No. Yeah, Harold Clark and Graham Nash are not rock and roll names. It's like Fabian.
Yeah.
Elvis. I mean, those are really great names. We didn't have good names, so we made two up, and I have no idea where they came from.
Yeah. And then you were the Gaiatones.
The Gaiatones, only because we finally were able to, with all these gigs that we were doing in pubs and stuff like that, able to afford electric guitars. And it was a very cheap one called a Gaiatone, and so we went, okay, we're the Gaiatones, great. But we had great imagination.
Well, actually, I think your imagination really ran away with you, because then you became the Four Tones, but there were 5 of you. You should have stayed in school, Graham.
I know, I should have. But the Four Tones were a great band. We found this, you'll read about it in the book. Me and Alan Clark were doing like a coffee bar, like a fake beatnik coffee bar where they would wear berets and they would clap by clicking that, it's fake stuff. But we were doing a lunchtime gig there, and then this kid comes up to us and he goes, "You know what? You need bocking." I said, "I do." "What do you mean, bocking?" He said, No, I mean Pete Bocking." I said, "Okay, Pete Bocking, never heard of him. Why should we know Pete Bocking?" He said, "Because he can play every electric guitar solo you ever loved in your life. Every Buddy Holly solo, every Gene Vincent, every Elvis, Scotty Moore solo, everything." He says, "And you need drums and bass. And I'm telling you, drums, bass, Pete Bocking, and you two singing, we're having a rock and roll band." And so we went to see this Pete Bocking, right? And he was the strangest musician I've ever seen. First of all, he was completely bald at 16, right? This is not looking good for a rock and roll band, But Pete Bocking could play his ass off. He was so impressive. And so that became the Four Tones, even though there were 5 of us.
There were 5 of you, right.
5 tones. No, that doesn't sound right. Yeah. The Four Tones were a great band. As a matter of fact, the bass player, Butch, had this 8mm camera, and I'd forgotten all about it, but he sent me this twisted up piece of 8mm footage. And so because I have a home in Los Angeles, obviously the movie land, right? I knew someone that could take this 8mm, not destroyed, but twisted and stretched piece of film and turn it into whatever the hell it was. And it was us and the Four Tones. from 1960.
Wow.
Having a great time, you know, doing Everly Brothers songs. I mean, you know, the Everly Brothers were incredibly important to me.
I'm just about to get to them.
Is that right?
Yes. I was going to say that it seems that every band from, you know, the Hollies to the Beatles to Bruce Springsteen to Mumford and Sons, they all reference the Everly Brothers. Why were the Everly Brothers such an important influence?
Several things. First of all, they had incredible voices.
Mm-hmm.
They had this beautiful Kentuckian accent. They were brothers, and so they were genetically connected. The songs were great, you know. Felice and Boudleaux Bryant wrote most of the Everly Brothers songs, but the Everly Brothers wrote, I think Phil wrote Kathy's Clown, I think Don wrote So Sad.
That's right.
So, let me just tell you how important the Everly Brothers are to me.
Yeah.
April 22nd, 1960, the Everly Brothers are coming to town, and I'm dying. Me and Alan Clark are dying to see them, right?
How old were you?
In 60, I was 18.
18.
And we'd been doing a couple of Everly Brothers songs in our set, as long as it was skiffle stuff and stuff. And we decided that we're going to meet the Everly Brothers. We don't care how late it's going to be, we're going to meet the Everly Brothers. Now then, where they were playing in Manchester, I don't know if anyone's been there, but it was called the Free Trade Hall, and it was a beautiful hall where the Halley Orchestra played. And that's where their show was. But the best hotel in town was only like 100 yards away, so we kind of guessed that that's where they were staying because there was no tour bus, even though probably in those days there weren't any tour buses, but there wasn't like a big vehicle where they're going to go on to, you know, London, for instance, right? So we kind of figured that they were going to stay at the Midland Hotel. So after the show, me and Clarky decide that we're going to wait on the steps, and we're waiting, and it's raining, and we miss our last bus home, and we know we're going to have to walk 9 miles home in the dark. We didn't care. We were determined to meet the Everly Brothers. About 1:20 in the morning, they came round the corner, and they'd been to a nightclub. They were not drunk, but they were happy, right? Instead of like patting us on the head and signing a quick autograph, they stood and talked to me and Alan Clark for what felt like 20 minutes. And it changed my life. And I realized that in many ways, we're all trying to touch the flame of whatever greatness that we admire. You know, you want to go and see the David, and you know, you're dying to rub his toe, you know, on the statue. You know what I mean? You can't because it's just out of respect. But you want to get as close to the flame as possible. And here's me and Alan Clark standing on the steps of the Midland Hotel talking to the Everly Brothers, right? Well, you know, what do you do? Well, you know, we're two little kids and we sing some of your songs, and one day we hope to be in the music business and make records. You know, just the normal stuff that you would tell to your idols, right? 6 years later, the Hollies are playing at the London Palladium, and it's kind of like the
Ed Sullivan Show.
Yeah, like the Ed Sullivan Show. It's a very important show.
Mm-hmm.
After sound check, the phone rings backstage, and our road manager Rod Shields picks it up. He goes, "Yeah, hello, yeah, yes, it's here. Yeah, hold on a second." Puts a receiver against it. He goes, "Graham, it's Phil Everly." I said, "Stop. That's not nice. That's just not nice." I'm telling you, Phil Everly. So I pick up the phone and I go, "Hello, this is Graham." He goes, "Hey, Graham, it's Phil." And I knew immediately because I'd been used to his voice for so long. It was Phil Everly, and he wanted to know whether the Hollies had any songs. That him and Don were in town. They were going to do an album called Two Yanks in England. Did we have any songs? Boy, did we have songs. We had about 15 that we hadn't recorded yet. So we went to their hotel. It was the Ritz Hotel in London, quite a posh place. And so 6 years after meeting them and telling them that we want to be in the business, right, we're recording with them. They're not only doing 8 of our songs, but we're helping them sing it, right? Okay, one more thing. 92, Toledo, Ohio. I mean, we're going to play, I think it was Friday afternoon. The CSN is going to play on Saturday. My phone rings in the hotel. Now, nobody calls me in the hotel. It's just that way, right? The phone rings, and that's unusual. I pick up the phone, and it's Phil Everly again. I said, "Phil, what the hell are you calling me? I'm in Toledo, Ohio." He goes, "Yeah, you're playing tomorrow night, right?" I go, "Yeah." He said, "Well, we're playing tonight. Do you want to come to the show?" I said, let me get this straight. Do I want to go to an Everly Brothers show with the Everly Brothers? Okay. So we go. Now, I don't know whether you know anything about rock and roll, but usually after sound check, you start eating rubber chicken for dinner. It's the way it is. So we're eating this, semi-awful food. And Don looks at me and he goes, so what are you going to sing with us? I'm dying. I'm dying. It's been a lifelong dream, right? And that's how I learned to sing, right? So I said, well, I love So Sad. That's a beautiful song. So Phil says, okay, I'll sing underneath Don. You take my part. And I said, why? He said, because I've got the high part. And I said, you know what? You taught me to sing. You stay exactly where you are. I'll go on top of your part. I have a cassette that I just recently found of me and the Everly Brothers singing So Sad in 3-part harmony, and it will knock you on your of Wild Tales, there's not only an audio book, which was very interesting to read my own words, all in one thing. But there's going to be an ebook also. And I just got permission from Phil Everly to put this cassette of me and the Everly Brothers singing together. You're going to just love it.
One of the things that I think is interesting, on that session that you did with the Everly Brothers in London, after the Palladium, there were some interesting sidemen on that.
A couple of them,
on that gig.
A guy called Jimmy Page, and a rather chubby little guy called Reggie Dwight.
I think he goes by the name of Elton John now, right? Yeah.
I think he goes by the name of Elton John now.
But
you know what? The truth was that what an incredible writer Elton is. I mean, when you listen to some of those early songs that Elton wrote, I mean, unbelievable writer. And he was always an unbelievable writer. And he worked for a man called Dick James. Dick James was a music publisher in London. And the standard deal was 50-50 with the band. That was a standard deal, and nobody ever argued with it, right? But that's a lot of money, right? So we were about to sign with Dick, and he made a big mistake. He said, I'm very glad that you're part of the company. If there's anything ever goes wrong, just come and talk to me and we'll sort it out. So 6 years later, when I know that I've already heard me and David and Stephen sing, and I wanted that golden sound desperately, so I'm leaving the Hollies, right? So part of the thing to undo all my stuff in England is get my publishing, and figure out what was going on with that. So I go to Dick and I say, Dick, remember when we signed 6 years ago with you? He goes, I remember the day precisely. I said, well, remember what you said? You said, if anything's wrong, that we'll be able to sort it out. He said, yes, I remember. I said, well, I'm leaving the Hollies. And he was like, everybody, even all my friends thought I was crazy to leave the Hollies, but they hadn't heard me and David and Stephen sing, and I had.
We'll get there.
So Dick said, you leaving the Hollies? Are you crazy? I said, no, I'm going to go to America. I'm done with England. I need to move. I said, so what are we going to do about my publishing contract? He says, this is what we're going to do. Hello, Doris? Yeah, bring in Graham's contract a second. Thank you. Puts the phone down and we're twiddling our thumbs until his secretary comes. She brings my contract to him and he says, this is what we're going to do. And he tore it up and gave it back to me.
Now what makes that...
Do you know, wait, just a second.
Go
Do you
ahead.
know how many millions of dollars I've made from publishing in the last 20-odd, 30-odd years? And he knew. He was a mensch about this. He kept to his word. It's unheard of today in the business for anybody to do anything like that and risk losing millions of dollars. He was a mensch about this, and I'll be forever grateful.
What makes the story even more amazing is that he held the Beatles to their contract with Northern Songs, and they hated him for it. And Elton hated him so much that when he finally broke free, he named his own publishing company Big Pig after Dick. And I know that because I worked for the guy myself.
Well,
so he was
well,
a
he
mensch to you.
he must have learned from me, of having made a big mistake financially, of course. But yeah, because when every time a piece of music is played, there's writing royalties and
Ka-ching.
there's money to be made.
Exactly.
With the Beatles, are you kidding?
Yeah.
what an unbelievable amount of money Dick James made, you know, having 50% of the Beatles. Doesn't sound fair nowadays, does it? But that's the way it was then.
Yeah, he did you a solid. You had said it before, the Hollies were one of the most popular and successful bands of the British Revolution. You know, 17, 18 hits in a row that you had with them. Clarky and the other guys were your mates. How and why did you begin to drift away from the group?
There were several reasons why I left the Hollies. And in no particular order, I'd written a song when we were on tour in Europe, in Split, in Yugoslavia, called King Midas in Reverse. And we made a pretty decent record of it. It was actually voted #1 psychedelic record of that year, right. So that was how wild it was. But it only got into the top 30. Now, by anybody's standards, that's incredible. Are you kidding? But not to the Hollies. They were used to every song going into the top 5, you know, going to #1. You know, that's what they were used to, right? So all of a sudden, this song that I wrote, that we made a record of, you know, is failing, right? So they didn't trust my musical, you know, direction then, right? They also wanted to do an album of Bob Dylan songs. And personally, Bob Dylan is the greatest American poet as far as I'm concerned. So I was kind of into it. And I did one track with them called Blowing in the Wind. And it's the most awful thing that you'll probably ever hear. It was Blowing in the Wind by Bob Dylan, but like with a brass orchestra and jazzy, like, hey, blowing in the wind. It was fucking awful. Right? So that's two things. And the third, and probably most important, is that I'd heard me and David and Stephen sing. Mm-hmm. And I wanted it. I wanted that sound. I knew what that sound would be able to do for people. You know, the Byrds and the Buffalo Springfield and the Hollies were great harmony bands. We knew what we were doing. But the moment, whatever sound Crosby, Stills and Nash has was born in 40 seconds. Not years, not months of rehearsing. 40 seconds. I was at dinner at Joni's house. David and Stephen were there. We finished dinner and David says to Stephen, hey, play Willie that song. So he plays me a song called You Don't Have to Cry, which is a song off the first record. It's gorgeous, a gorgeous song. They came to the end of it. They sang it two-part because it was just those two. And I said, okay, wow. First of all, it's a great song. Sing it again. And they looked at each other and they went, okay, and they sang it again. And I said, okay, bear with me. Sing it one more time. And in those two performances of that song, I remembered every single word and knew exactly what I wanted to do. They started singing, we hit that three-part, and we all started laughing. Because it was silly. It was ridiculous that something sounded like that from nothing. You know, sure, rehearse for a year and get all the harmonies right and get the blend right. That never happened with us. It happened immediately. What a thing to hear. So I'd heard that. I knew how powerful that was. I'd heard Guinevere. I'd heard Helplessly Hoping. I'd heard Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. What the hell was I supposed to do? I wanted it, right? And it, you know, leaving the Hollies was sad for me. I felt very selfish. I felt, you know, Alan Clark had been my friend since I was 6 years old, you know, and he was my best friend, and I knew I'd be leaving him behind. I left my first wife. We were getting divorced anyway, but I left my wife, I left my band, I left my bank account, I left all my instruments. I got on the next plane, and I was, you know, in 2 days working with David and Stephen. That's how powerful that sound is to me.
Would it be fair to say that Cass Elliot was a pivotal character in your...
I think it's beyond fair.
Uh-huh.
Here's a story. In 1960, late 66, the Hollies were being thrown a party in Los Angeles by our record company. And it's the usual schmooze, you know, having a plastic glass of cheap wine in you. You know, you've been to 1,000 of them. You know what I'm talking about.
This is Washington.
No. Good point. This 15-year-old kid comes up to us, and he starts talking. which for English people, that, you know, you don't start talking. First of all, you've got to introduce yourself, for God's sake, you know.
Right.
Anyway, he starts rattling on, and it's obvious that he knows everything about the Hollies, and he's a stone fan, right? He knew every B-side. He knew, well, it's almost shameful to admit, but he knew of a Shell oil advert that the Hollies had done in 1964.
Oh, shame on you.
Right? Shame indeed. And then at the end of his conversation, he said, "So, what are you doing after this party?" Well, you know, with English people, you know, the best defense is to turn it back on the questioner. So I said, "Well, I don't know what I'm doing," which I really didn't, you know. I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I've got these friends who are making a record down the street. They call the Mamas and the Papas, and I thought you might like to go." Okay, now I'll admit, I'd seen the first record company. I wanted Michelle badly, okay? she was the epitome of the summer of love, California hippie, long blonde-haired chick. I mean, every red-blooded American wanted Michelle Phillips. When I went to the studio, John and Denny and Michelle were putting a vocal on one of their tracks. And outside the studio was Cass. And so I start talking to Cass, right? You know, la 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 la. She kind of knew who I was. And she said to me, she said, "What do you think John Lennon would think about music?" And I said, "Well, you know, I know John a little. You know, I've known him since 1959. I don't know him like I'm not his best friend, but I do know him. He'll probably like put you down at first and keep you at arm's length until he trusts you enough to let you in. That, you know, that's true of a lot of north of England people. You know, they want to know who you are before they will actually let you in." And I look up at Cass and she's crying her eyes out. And I went, holy shit, I just met this woman and she's crying. She had a crush on John and that was the last thing she wanted to hear, that, you know, right? And then she said, "So what are you doing tomorrow?" I go, "What is it with you Yanks? You always want to know what we do." She said, I said, "Why?" She said, "Because I want to introduce you to this friend of mine. I think you'll get on really well." So, having spoken to Cass for about an hour, I really trusted her. She was very much like Gertrude Stein, you know. She would invite many people from different disciplines around to her house for dinner, and we'd all talk with architects and artists and musicians, and you know, great bunches of people. She picked me up at the Knickerbocker Hotel in Los Angeles in a convertible Porsche. And we drive up Laurel Canyon, which I don't know whether you know, but it's not that far from the center of town. It's only 10 minutes up the canyons. We climb up these stairs. I come upon this room. There's very little in it except some great speakers and a guitar or two and a couch. And lying on this couch is a guy in a striped t-shirt. I'll never forget it. Striped blue and white t-shirt, pair of blue jeans and no shoes. On his chest, he has the top of a shoebox lid. And in that is, of course, a handful of grass. And as he's talking to me, always keeping eye contact with me, shaking this shoebox lid, he's separating the grass from the stems and the seeds.
Perfectly, right?
Perfectly. I had never seen anything like that in my life, you know. So I immediately liked this kid, you know. And his name was David Crosby, and my life has not been the same since that day.
Yeah.
So yes, Cass Elliot was it for
Without
us.
a doubt.
Yeah.
And that was the first day you got high, wasn't it? If I'm not
Yeah.
telling too many things out
No,
of...
it's all in the book. Yeah. No, it was, yeah, the first time I'd ever gotten high.
You know, you did not come to this relationship empty-handed, though. You
No.
came with the transcendent Marrakesh Express, which was already written. Would you tell us how that came about?
In 1966, I just finished a book on the Beat poets about Ginsberg and Burroughs and Gregory Corso and all those poets that had gone down to Marrakesh, and all they were doing was smoking dope all day and writing. And, you know, don't know why, but it appealed to me. So I decided I'm going to retrace the steps, and you know, we went to North Africa. As an aside story, a very funny thing. I'm on the beach in Tangiers. I must be the only guy on the beach for miles. And I'm lying there and I see a tiny man in the distance. And he keeps getting closer and closer, and of course he's getting bigger and bigger. And just as he passed me, he had a portable radio to his ear, and he pressed a button to turn it to another station, and Carrie Ann came out of the radio. And I'm the only one lying there on this entire fucking beach. And didn't have the balls to go, and because I didn't know what language he spoke, you know, so I never said anything. But anyway, so we got to Casablanca, we took the train down to Marrakesh. I'd booked first-class tickets, and I was sitting in the first-class compartment with my first wife, Rosie, and our friend Joanne, and a couple of American ladies who were slightly older. They were, you know, maybe 70, 80 years old, which doesn't look that old to me from my present position. But then, you know, their hair was dyed blue, and those are the American ladies dressed in blue. Anyway, it was boring to me, so I went to the third-class compartment and saw real life. And I'm not kidding. Goats, pigs, chickens, people cooking food on little, you know, blowing a little reed instrument with a snake coming out. I mean, it was madness, right? And I went back to my first class compartment and wrote Marrakesh Express. I mean, who wouldn't, right? And the Hollies actually, this was after the King Madison reverse incident, when they didn't trust me to write hits, right? But I thought Marrakesh Express would have been a hit by the Hollies, right? So we have an actual recording of it with the Hollies that's in the bowels of EMI at Abbey Road somewhere, but it's quite awful because they just weren't into it, right? But I did. I had a lot of songs. I'd started Teach Your Children. I had the first sleep song, you know, Right Between the Eyes, you know, and yeah.
You were really going in a different direction completely.
Yes, I was.
They were happy, should I say, to continue cranking out top 40 songs, and
they were happy. They were very content to do that. I mean, why? Why not? They were making a fortune. They were on television every week, in the charts every other week, of course. But that wasn't enough for me. I'd seen David and Stephen's writing. I knew what Joni Mitchell was writing. I knew what a genius she was, and I began to realize that these, you know, 2.5-minute pop songs, you know, Moon, June, Screw Me in the Back of the Car kind of songs, they're all great, and I know because I wrote Carrie Ann, I wrote On a Carousel, I'm used to that, right? But David and Stephen and Neil and Joni were writing similar songs with a hook that would grab you immediately, but they were about real things. You know, Long Time Gone was about Robert Kennedy being assassinated, you know, For What It's Worth about the LA riots that Stephen had, you know. And so it changed me. Being around those people changed the way I wrote. I began to realize that you could talk about real stuff and still get away with people hearing a melody and wanting to buy it, you know. And
so you weren't just growing up in age, you were growing up as an artist as well.
Even to this day.
Yeah, always evolving.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does a guy from Salford, in fact, I want to know this, how does a guy from Salford get to be Joni Mitchell's boyfriend?
Crosby called me one day, and he said, I just produced this record by this Canadian folk singer called Joni Mitchell, and it's really, really special. She is really special and very, very beautiful. And if you ever see her, you know, go and say hello and let her know that we're friends, because, you know, she's worth knowing. The Hollies played in Ontario in Canada, and after the show, the guy that was running the show and everything, we had a little party in the Holiday Inn where we were, whichever hotel it was, and I've got a glass of wine in my hand, and I see this girl in the corner of this room, and my manager at the time, Robin Britton, came up talking to me, and he's talking in my ear, and I think he's saying, well, this is the producer, his name's George, say hello, you know, his wife's had a cold, ask her how she, you know, those kind of people, and he keeps talking to me, and I'm trying to catch this girl's eye, right, you know. I said, Robin, will you shut the f up? I'm trying to connect with this girl. He said, well, if you'd only listen to me, I'm trying to tell you that her name is Joni Mitchell. She said she's a friend of David Crosby's, and she wants to meet you. So I go up to Joan. On her knee, she has what looked like a tooled old leather Bible, but huge. It must have been at least 18 by 20 and this thick. It was huge, but it was a music box. And the music box had a note that didn't work, that I don't know, had rusted or fallen off or something. So we would play this beautiful melody, da 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 da, and we'd start laughing about this note that wasn't there, right? And she invited me back to her hotel. She was actually playing in a folk club in Ontario. I spent the night with Joan. I heard 15 of the greatest songs I'd ever heard in my life. All those songs from her first album, Michael from Mountains, you know, I Had a King, Nathan Lafreniere, all those incredibly great songs. I'm losing it. I mean, I've heard about love at first sight. I know that, but it's happened twice in my life. Twice in my life, my heart has gone right out through my chest. Once was with Joan that night, and the other was when I met my wife, Susan, who I'm still married to 37 years later.
Mm-hmm. You always get a hand for that, like rock and rollers shouldn't be married for 37 years.
Well, you know, people think it's a weird business to be in, but, you know, to me it's just life, you know.
Yeah.
I'm happy to have been with Susan. I mean, she's still calling me on my, you know. And I don't like yes men. I don't like people telling me I'm great, because I know I'm not. I'm decent and I'm good at what I do because, you know, if I'd have been a plumber for 50 years, I'd be a great plumber, right? But I've been a musician for all that time. So I personally don't think it's any big deal, but she keeps my feet on the ground. She definitely does. I'll tell you one thing about her that'll give you an example of who she is. On my first date with Susan, I was driving down Sunset Boulevard, and she has a Carmen Ghia, which is a sports Volkswagen cheap kind of car, and she has it to this day. We were driving down Sunset Boulevard, and I see this incredible looking woman out the corner of my eye, and she was probably a hooker, let's get real, right? She's standing on the corner looking fantastic, you know, in the blazing Los Angeles sun. So I'm trying to look at this woman, you know, and making sure that Susan doesn't know that I'm looking at this woman. Well, she pulls over, she jams on the brakes, and she says, listen, don't you ever not look at a beautiful woman if you're going to be with me. Let's get that straight right now. I loved her from that moment.
Yeah. Let's not gloss over Joni so quickly.
She's a hard one to gloss over.
She is a hard one to gloss over. Instrumental in your coming to the States and your development as an artist?
Not instrumental in me coming to the States. David and Stephen, that sound was instrumental in bringing me to the States to live on a serious level. But artistic development, how could you live with a genius and not have some of it rub off?
Yeah.
You know? I mean, seriously. I mean, I'm never, ever, in a million years, ever compare myself to Joni Mitchell, but, you know, I mean, when you're around that kind of talent, of course it's going to rub off. You're going to figure something out if you're bright, right? I mean, come on. She's Joni Mitchell, for God's sake. There's a portrait in my book. There's a favorite one at shows that I do of my photographs that I took of Joni listening to an acetate of her album Clouds. You know, when wow, vinyl. Remember vinyl?
Yeah. I do. Yeah.
Before there were no CDs, of course, so it was vinyl records. But to be able to test it and make sure that it's cool to go out to the customers, you would get an acetate of your album and you'd put the needle on and you'd listen very carefully for clicks and pops and distortion and kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So she's listening to her acetate of her album, and I like to be invisible when I'm taking photographs. I don't want anyone to know that I'm taking that picture, because having had so many pictures taken of myself personally, I know that I always instinctively go for my best side and try and look like James Dean and try and, you know, but I don't like those moments. They're not real moments to me. I like moments where they have no idea that I'm there. And this particular image of Joan, I shot through the back of a chair. You know, a kitchen chair that has a hole in the back that you lift it up and just move it. I'm shooting through the back there, and I think the image is actually in the book. It's a beautiful image, and my God, she was a beautiful woman.
Mm. I want to open it up for questions, because I know people have a lot of things they'd like to ask you.
Maybe.
But, you know, I can't gloss over this, and perhaps your longest and your most enduring relationship is with David Crosby, and we can't ignore that.
No, nor would we want to.
Right. One of the most satisfying, and yet I have to imagine it's one of the most difficult relationships you've ever had.
I think you're absolutely right. It is the most rewarding and the most difficult of my relationships. I've always known that Crosby was an incredibly unique musician. Nobody makes music like David Crosby. His sense, you know, his main love originally was jazz. So he has a lot of complicated chords in difficult tunings, you know. I'm, you know, A, D, E, I'm out of there. You know what I mean? It's like I write differently. David and I think differently about music. I want to get you right now. I'm not sure we have enough time span to listen to a 5-minute piece of music to figure out what the hell I'm saying. I want you now, right? And I was trained that way with the Hollies, and I can't get rid of that thing in me in terms of songwriting. I want to write a melody that you can hear once and go, I want to hear that again. That's how I write. Now, David's different. He likes intricate chord patterns and fingering patterns and words. For instance, Crosby's got a brand new song called What Time I Have. And in it, he uses 3 words, cognitive dissonance and antithesis, in the same song. It would take me years to write something so complicated as that. But Crosby has been one of my most trying and yet rewarding friends I've ever had. I loved him from the moment I first saw him. He was so irreverent. About the second day that I'd met David, the Byrds were in London, and he was staying at, funnily enough, he was staying at a little hotel in London called the White House. I swear to God, right? I call him one day and I go, you know what, you can't smoke dope in the White House, come on. Come to my house, come to my apartment, come and stay with me, get out of the hotel, come and stay with me. So he did. The next day, the Hollies were doing a press conference. We had a single out that was in the top 5 and people wanted to talk to us, right, you know. And I asked David if he wanted to come along and he said, sure, I'll come along, right. So the Hollies were used to doing as they were told. I mean, if a photographer for a music magazine said, okay, well, all look round the corner and put your heads like, you know, like in a column like that and I'll take the image, it'll be a great, and we'd do that, right? Stand on your head, put your elbow in your ear, it'll be a great picture. We used to do that because we thought that was the game, right? So a guy comes up to me at this press conference and he asked me the most stupid question about what color my socks were, right? And Crosby said, off. I was shocked, right? And the guy said, what? He said, ask him a decent question. Who cares what color socks he has? There's wars going on. Come on, ask him. I mean, that's who Crosby was from the day I met him. And I loved him. He was so irreverent. He didn't give a about all these people that were ordering people around to get the best picture and do this and do that and do that. He was himself from the day I met him. And it was very appealing to me because I'd learned to play what I thought the game was. Do what photographers said. Answer the question as stupid as it is. You know, I thought that was playing the game. Crosby introduced me to a whole other game. Oh boy.
In more ways than one.
In more ways than one.
Plus he has that gorgeous Gallic voice that...
And he still has it.
Yes, and with
Crosby
you,
is singing his ass off. He's still got that fabulous voice.
Yeah.
I mean, when he punches out at the end of Wooden Ships or Almost Cut My Hair, people are shocked at how strong David is. I mean, this guy's a Leo, right? He's probably on his 15th life. You know, Crosby is... We've nearly lost Crosby a lot of times to really sad occasions, but he must be a bull. I mean, because, you know, I mean, well, the average lifespan for a liver transplant guy is about 15 years. Crosby's on his 18th year and still rocking. It's amazing. This guy never, ever ceases to amaze me.
And a recovering crack addict.
Yes.
You know.
I tell a story. There was only one time that Legal called me from the book publishers. And when you read the book, you'll understand how crazy this was. But they said, this one story you have about Crosby, we have to know that that's true. Because this is so devastating. We have to know that it's true. I said, so even though I was there, you still want me to ask David? He said, look, this is legal. Would you do that? So I called David and I sent him the paragraph. And here is the story. He had sold his Mercedes for crack.
Because he was broke, right?
Because he was completely flat broke and he was addicted. The dealer OD'd, died. While the dealer was still in the bed, dead, Crosby broke into his house and stole his pink slip back to the Mercedes. And legal said, look, are you sure this is true? So I sent David the paragraph. I said, this is what I remember. David wrote me back. He says, not only is it absolutely true, not only did I do that, not only did I put you guys through all that I put you through, but I resold the car for crack. He's clean and straight though, now. He's having a great time with his life. I think he really realized that, you know, he's not invincible. He's not, you know, godlike, you know, that we're all weak human beings with our own weaknesses and strengths. But he's having a good time. Stephen's having a great time. I talked to Neil 3 days ago. We're going to, CSN are going to join him at the Bridge benefit in the end of October. I'm working on a 3, maybe 4 CD box set of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young from our 1974 tour.
Hard to believe that's never been on record before.
You know, the truth is that the tour was so crazy. I think that every time we listen to the music, our minds goes back to the craziness, and it's not nice, right? But Neil asked me to do it, and I'm about 11 mixes from the end. And I know Neil. When he says, hey, Willie, you want to come up and do the Bridge benefit this year? You know, come up and see how we sound in case we want to do anything. I know what that means. This is Neil Young. He never wastes one word. I know what he's after.
Yeah.
And I'd be perfectly happy to sing with Neil Young again.
Yeah. Well, let's open it up for some questions from the audience, okay?
If there are any.
If there are any.
Folks, if you would just mind waiting for a microphone, because we are recording this for the National Digital Collection.
Okay.
Thanks.
Where are we starting? Back there? Let's start back there.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Crosby, my name's, or excuse me, you're
Hey.
talking about David.
Hey, Stephen
it's all
calls
one.
us the
Sorry
same
about
thing.
that.
Don't worry. Stephen
Mr.
still
Nash,
doesn't know
sorry
my
about
name.
that. How over the years, how have you maintained the ability to keep up a level of output and inspiration? You know, in youth, it seems like whether you're a novelist or a musician, there is a prolific output and creative burst. How have you sustained that over a lifetime?
My father was dead at 46. I'm living 2 lives. I want to live for him too. 46. I spent my 45th year trying to figure out if I was going to drop dead like my dad did. You know, I mean, you must think about those things. I don't know whether it's ever happened to you guys, but you know, he was dead at 46. My next birthday is 72. I mean, I made it past the day that my father died, and it's incredibly important to me. One of the stories that you read in the book is, you remember before when I talked about my mom and dad encouraging me to get into the business rather than slapping me upside the head, right? I said to my mother, I said, why did you and my father do that? I mean, you know, everybody else's parents were like dissuading them. Why? Why did you? She said, because I wanted to be a singer. I said, what?
This was when she was almost dying.
This is 2 years before she died, and she had a pretty sad last 2 years. She said, I thought I had a good voice. I wanted to be on the stage. You know, World War II came along. I married your father. We had 3 kids. It was over for me. You're living my life. 1971, Carnegie Hall. Me and David are playing Carnegie Hall. David has to take a pee. So I'm stood talking to the audience, right? So I start to tell them as to why I'm standing in front of them at that moment. And I tell them about my mom. And as I'm telling the story, I reach my hand into my jacket pocket and I pull out some of my mother's ashes and I scatter them on the stage at Carnegie Hall. The audience went crazy. And everywhere I've been that I thought my mom would like to sing, she's there.
Back here with
Yes,
the mic.
sir.
Oh, go ahead.
Nice T-shirt, man.
Thank you, sir. You actually signed this several years ago.
I know. I remember that. You know, I was wearing that T-shirt in Ireland, in Belfast, and a kid had a Buffalo Springfield t-shirt on, and he wanted my t-shirt, which is exactly that one that you're wearing. And in the lobby of the hotel, we changed shirts. Anyway, I'm sorry, what was your question?
No, I was going to speak to asking you how you got involved in the political scenes there. And speaking of this shirt, I know Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy in London has one of these shirts. He is an associate member of the London chapter of Veterans for Peace. But at the beginning, you kind of seemed to indicate that David Crosby was a guy who was trying to speak truth to power. And if you could...
Crosby has always spoken truth to power.
Good for him.
And when I heard things like Long Time Gone, I began to realize that there was a lot going on in politics that needs to be spoken about. I wasn't any stranger to it. In 1964, I wrote a song called Too Many People, which was about the fact that I thought that there were simply too many rats on the planet for us to be able to, you know, use all our goods and services up at this rate and expect to live more than another 1,000 years. You know, I really started to get serious about writing. That's why I wrote, you know, Almost Gone about Bradley Manning, you know. A song that we're doing that's going down incredibly well, even though the audience has never heard it before, is a song about the 128 Tibetan monks who have burned themselves to death in this last year alone. 128 burned themselves to death. Can you imagine what that's like? So I've always been for the underdog. When I drive my wife crazy, you know. I'm always 72-6. Oh, I'm sure they'll make it. Come on, I'm always for the underdog, and whatever it is, right? But I think it's important to speak about real issues because we're much more interested, because we have been trained by the media to think in terms of Justin Bieber's monkey, rather than what's going on in Syria, for instance. Now, there's a lot of people involved in what's really going on, but the majority of us are still trying to figure out the size of Kim Kardashian's right? It's like bread and circuses all over again. I mean, the Romans invented it, and I'm sure it was going on for thousands of years before the Romans invented it. Give the populace something to eat, give them something to watch, and we'll be able to control them. That's exactly what's going on today. So that's why I'm a great admirer of both Julian Assange and Bradley Manning.
Excuse me for a second, has politics ever cost Crosby, Stills, and Nash anything?
I'll never know.
You told me a little bit about a tour you did with Neil.
Yeah, we did a tour in 2006 called Living with War. That was CSNY. That was the last time we ever went out as a big band. About 10% of the people, especially down south, would walk out when we got to a song called Let's Impeach the President, which was about George Bush. I understand that they have a right to their opinion, and I understand that they have a right to walk out, they have a right to get upset, they have a right to say whatever they want to say. But holy Toledo, if you buy a ticket for a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young concert, what do you expect? Seriously. It was the first tour I'd ever been on with bomb-sniffing dogs. There was a lot of tension on that tour, you know. You know, the majority of people thought that George Bush was an incredible president, you know, and I happen to, you know, disagree vehemently about it. And they, as I said, they had the right to walk out, but they sure did miss some great songs after Let's Impeach the President.
Over here, yeah.
I've got the mic. As a songwriter, how do you reconcile your motivation in writing a song with an audience member's interpretation of that song? You know, once you put it out there, is it yours anymore?
No, and I don't care. Once I write a song, it has to make it, first of all, through my filters. It has to make it through me. And in keeping with what I said before about not wasting your time, I don't want to sing you a song that you don't care about. What the hell is the point, right? So as a songwriter, if it makes it past me, there's a good chance that it's going to make it, you know, to you guys, right? But I'm an incredibly selfish person in many ways. I only write for me. I don't even write for Crosby, Stills and Nash or Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. I only write for me. I have to get it out of myself. I have 36 new songs and 50 I'm writing as we're speaking. They're in this incredible conveyor belt that I have in my mind, and I go, wait a second, that little melody I just thought of fits that word, those three. Okay, now I've got one line. And you just start building just like bricks. You know, that's how I do it. You know, people ask me, how do you write songs? I don't know. But I know that I have to say something about something. And that's my motivation. I have to be moved before I can write anything that's worth a damn.
I think it's interesting that the only time you ever really wrote and you were challenged to write was in an airport in Hawaii as you were leaving. And I thought that's a good story.
Well, I was in Hawaii once, and I had about an hour and a half before the flight to Los Angeles. And I was at a friend's house, and he was actually being quite a smart. And he said, you know, you're supposed to be some big shot songwriter, but you can't write a song before you go.
They're ahead of you already on this one, Graham.
It was our biggest hit. I'm not kidding. It happened, you know. This guy trying to think that I can't write songs. I'll show you. You know, so I wrote just a song before I go in about 40 minutes. And recently he sent me back my original lyrics that I wrote at his piano, and they're now in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland.
Right.
Funny story, but true.
Where? The mic, okay.
Yes.
Hi, I want to thank
You're on.
I want to thank you for all of your anti-nuclear work and attention to the dangers of nuclear power, and as Fukushima continues to spew into the ocean, and we're about to have 6 weeks of hearings here in the U.S. on whether or not to make more nuclear waste. Finally have that question before the public. I thought I'd give you the chance to talk about nukes for a minute.
I was having dinner in the late 70s with Jacques Cousteau.
Name dropper.
No. I was just telling you what happened, right? So I'm having dinner with Jacques, and I go, so Jacques, tell me what you think the greatest danger to humanity is. Now I'm expecting a fish answer, right? I'm expecting we're screwing up the oceans, which we are, of course. You know, whales. I expected some ocean answer, right? He looks at me and he goes, nuclear police. Now this is 1977. I said, Jack, what do you? I don't understand. What do you mean nuclear police? He said, there'll be a time in America shortly when they'll be able to come to your door without any warrant whatsoever and see if you've got any nuclear fissionable material. I said, are you kidding? So, and then he spent an hour with me talking about the nuclear industry, talking about, he actually equated it to a snake, with the miners dying from radon poisoning in the mines, you know, to the transportation, to the manufacturer, to the terrorist activity, to storage, you know, and insanity, you know. And so Jackson and Bonnie and James Taylor invited me on the board of an organization called the Musicians United for Safe Energy, which was Muse. And we decided that 3 Mile Island had just happened. We decided that the public we felt that they really need to know more about what's going on, because it was such a secret. Nobody knew about the dangers of nuclear power, because it was all so carefully, covered up. So we decided that if we're going to do something, we better do something big. So we decided that we're going to do 5 shows at Madison Square Gardens and a rally at Battery Park for 250,000 people on the Saturday. And we pulled it off. And there hasn't been one. Now, I'm not saying that we did it, but I think that we helped. You know, there hasn't been one nuclear power plant built since that day in the United States. In fact, they just shut down Yankee. They just shut down San Onofre in California. It's happening. People are beginning to realize that this energy that is going to be too cheap to meter is an insanity. They know how poisonous it is. They know what the half-life of plutonium is. They know that every power plant is becoming embrittled, as they call it, the older they get. They know about the leaks. They know. Somebody once sent me a document of 4,600 accidents in England alone since 1956 or something. the stuff that you don't know will scare the hell out of you. Anyway, we felt that we needed to speak up, and that's how I first got into the anti-nuclear movement. And even to this day, you know, what we do at our concerts is called tabling. And what that is there's tables right before you enter the actual hall where there's information about this and about children and about, you know, to make people more aware. Even to this day, we do that.
I just wanted to say that we'll take one more question, and then we'll...
well, this gentleman's had his hand up for about 20 minutes.
Yeah, okay, right over here. Right. Can you...
Yeah.
Pass that mic over.
Pass it over. Yes, sir.
Hi.
Hi.
You mentioned the Everleys as an important early influence. Were you a skiffle fan, and did that influence your early writing?
Absolutely a skiffle fan. I talked about that earlier. Lonnie Donegan was a hero. No, it was just before you came in. Yeah, I talked about how important skiffle music was for us because it gave us something to do other than, you know, go around bombed out houses trying to find stuff that people had left, which we did. That was our playtime. You'd go, you know, and they weren't shored up. They weren't like with scaffolding around them. They could have collapsed at any minute. You know, but we're kids. What, you know, we have no sense at that age. You know, so yeah, skiffle was very, very important in my life. Really.
I think that I just wanted to say that I spent a wonderful year listening to your stories, and we've only touched the tip of the iceberg tonight. They are in that book, and that book's a lot of fun. So Graham's going to sign books where, David? Right over here.
Yes. And so a warm round of applause, please, for Graham Nash.
Thank you, Bobby.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.